and we're going to have our guest. This is, like I said before, this is a person I've admired over the years, and that admiration has only grown, and that is none other than Matthew Arnold. He's also the author of numerous articles, the founder of Pro Maltese Media. He holds a certificate in Christian counseling, and he has a book which should be on everybody's bookshelf, in my humble opinion, and that is Confessions of a Traditional Catholic. And Matthew Arnold, welcome to Hands On Apologetics.
Well, thank you, Gary. I couldn't agree more. No home in America is complete without a copy of Confessions of a Traditional Catholic. I think we pretty much get that out right now. I also want to say I enjoyed the first segment, particularly the Finding the Fallacy segment. I always like that. I think that would make a swell name for a book, by the way. Finding the Fallacy. So if you find the time. And it's also a fun game to play with your kids when they bring you stuff, articles from the internet.
Yeah, right.
He believes. You say, let's play Find the Fallacy with this, shall we?
Yeah.
Anyway, great
very
to be
good.
here, Gary.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, the only thing is I would worry that would be a challenge, that people pick up the book, trying to find the fallacy and be explaining the fallacies. So, I'm always leery about giving a bio to someone who's going to talk about their life story, because it's like, oh, here's a story. Okay, now Matthew, tell us your story. Right. But why don't we start with this? Where did the idea of Confessions of a Traditional Catholic come about? Where did it come about?
Well, actually, there is kind of a long story involved in that. I'm a convert to the Catholic faith, and I wound up for a while in my search for a reverent liturgy out here in the wilds of Southern California. I actually wound up at one point outside the diocesan structure. And after Summorum Pontificum, the document that was issued motu proprio by Benedict XVI, I found my way back into full communion with the local ordinary, which was a joyous occasion, as you might imagine. And I was talking shortly after that to Scott Hahn, who said, don't write a book or go on a lecture tour, just let the dust settle. And then a few years later, I got a phone call from that same Scott Hahn who said, I think it's time for you to write that book now. and I said to him, if I do that, I'm going to have to tell my whole story and how I, stepped outside of the diocesan structure and attended illicit mass and so forth. And he said, yeah, well, so be it. And I told him, if you're kind enough to write a foreword, I'll be happy to write the book. And so I did.
Nice. Well, that's so, Scott Hahn put a bug in your ear to put it all down on paper. Yeah.
And it was largely because, he could see the challenges of, I think, young people at Steubenville who were very conflicted. Some of them, going off campus to attend the traditional Latin Mass. You had a lot more homeschool kids and stuff. And then also seeing kids that had very much engaged the culture and very much been part of that Steubenville evangelistic mentality, who go out into the world and wind up losing their faith.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, so, so really, it's not like, what do I want to say? It's part and parcel with your whole journey of faith from the beginning, isn't it? That, and maybe for those who, I don't know, who wouldn't be familiar with you, but maybe for those who aren't, maybe you can kind of give us a nutshell version of, tell us a little bit of your journey to faith all the way up to, when you started looking outside the diocese.
All right. Well, it all began at a 40-watt radio station in Fresno, California. No, that's somebody else's story, actually. I was raised in an atmosphere of generic Christianity, okay? My parents, like millions of other families in the early 60s, kind of fell away from regular church attendance, and I was just a toddler at the time. So I didn't really have any religious formation. I was unchurched, as they would say. We did have the practice of grace before meals and prayer before bedtime, Christmas tree, Easter eggs, the same as the culture. But I didn't have any kind of religious training or church-going experience or anything growing up. And that doesn't mean I never had any brushes with Christianity. I did in junior high, then in high school. I had friends who got involved primarily in fundamentalist groups who tried to evangelize me. And I, at this time, by the time I was in high school in the 70s, I was got involved in New Age type beliefs and practices. And thereby hangs a tale. I'll leave that for those who want to read the book.
Yeah.
But I got very involved in those kinds of things. And ultimately, though, I just kind of wrote Christianity off, and I kind of wrote everything off, and became essentially just practically agnostic. And then, I wound up falling in love with a Catholic girl, and she was very subtle in her evangelization. I was a musician when we first met and making my living that way. And so typically the only day off I would have was Sunday. And, and we would get together in the evening because I would sleep during the daytime because I was up all night. And I can recall many times calling her and saying, well, shall we go out tonight? And she says, yeah, why don't you come and by my, and she lived with her folks, why don't you come by my folks' house around 5 o'clock? And then I'd get there and she'd like, oh, I didn't go to mass today. So there's a church right around the corner. We can go to the evening mass there. I'm like, oh, okay. But it's like I say, subtle, they had those subtle evangelization techniques. And she was, weirdly convinced that I was the right guy to marry, but didn't understand why, considering I wasn't Catholic. And then when our first son was born, we were married in the church, and I promised to raise the kids Catholic and didn't take RCIA. And the priest that was helping us through the process just made me promise that when the kids came, started having questions, that I would take instruction at that time.
Okay.
Because you can't give what you don't have. And if you're going to raise your children Catholic, you have to have some idea about what the church teaches.
Very wise.
And yeah, makes perfect sense. When Macklin was not quite 3 years old, our first son, he had a question. He asked his mom why everybody went to communion except for him and Daddy. And that's in his experience. Obviously, there were more people that didn't go to communion except for us. But I always went to church with them as out of solidarity and being a good dad and all that. And she said, go ask your dad. Right. And so I took instruction and didn't intend to convert. Actually made that announcement the first day. They always go around the room. Who are you and why are you here? What's your name? I'm Bob and I'm getting married in the church and, I'm chill and I never got confirmed. And it came around to me and I said, my name's Matthew and I have no intention of becoming Catholic. I'm only here to find out what you people believe. So that
what was their reaction, by the way?
It was funny. I think the people didn't quite know how to take it, and people still quite don't know how to take me sometimes. The priest, however, was not fazed in the least, and he was just this perfect storm. He had gone, he had fallen away from the faith himself as a young man, and he was raised Catholic, but became kind of a Pentecostal believer, Assemblies of God type, and then had a very powerful reversion, felt the call to the priesthood, went to Rome, graduated summa cum laude from the Gregorian, was ordained by St. John Paul II himself, and then came back to Garden Grove to teach me RCIA, because that's how the Holy Spirit works.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. And so it was intellectually, when we got to the apostolic succession, the penny dropped for me. I'm going, okay, this is why it's different. My Bible believing friends seem to have, think that the Bible fell from the sky, bound in leather with gold edging on the pages.
Yeah. And,
and I thought, well, if you make up a religion on a book and you believe the book is true because the book says it's true, that's kind of circular reasoning, and it didn't appeal to me.
Right.
But now it's like, no, see, we got around week 6 was the apostolic succession. Jesus founded a church, and then the church gave us the Bible. It's like, oh, well, that's very different indeed.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the intellectual linchpin of my conversion. But the reason I converted is because people were praying for me, because my wife had been praying for me ever since she was a little girl. Even before we met, she started, when she discerned she didn't have a vocation to the religious life, she started praying for the man she was going to marry someday. Yeah. And the priest had us starting every class praying the rosary with the intention that our Blessed Lady would speak to her spouse, the Holy Ghost, and he would enlighten our hearts and minds. And, got to be careful when you do that stuff.
That's true. That's true. Now, did he institute that after your introduction that you have no intention of being Catholic, or was this?
Yes, he did. As far as I know, it was not his plan. But the next week, he came in with rosaries and pamphlets for everybody.
Beautiful.
Yeah, and what he said was, I don't know that I've got enough time to teach you everything there is to know about Catholicism, so we're going to sacrifice some time, and in prayer. And so I tell people, I pray the daily rosary still, but I started praying the rosary before I was even baptized.
Wow. Yeah. Boy, that's powerful. And look at
Yeah,
the results.
that's the gift of faith, you know.
Yeah.
I really did. When I thought about the apostolic succession, you know, well, Gary, you deal with Protestant converts all the time, and you know, I think a lot of our Protestant friends look at the Bible like a man looking down a well, right? Well, a man looking down a well can see nothing but a long dark tunnel and his own reflection at the other end.
Yeah.
And I think some of our separated brethren, they do that. They look at the New Testament, you know, like they're looking down a long dark tunnel, and they see their own reflection. They project themselves onto the New Testament,
Yeah.
and then kind of ignore everything that happened between then and now.
Yeah.
You know,
That's
and
a good
I honestly
analogy.
I got a what do you call it? Not a vision exactly, but a mental image of Pope John Paul II standing at a long line of popes that went all the way back to Peter. And I'm like, oh, see, that makes sense now, because, you know, we understand what the Bible is because we were there the whole time.
Yeah.
You know, we understand what the teachings of Jesus are because we were listening and then passing them on and so forth. And when that happened, I had that, you know, where it just all suddenly made sense to me. I had this, you know, moment of clarity, and I really wanted to be Catholic, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And the next week, I told the priest. And interestingly, if you knew me, it would be interesting, better. I told him I wanted to convert. I hadn't told my wife yet. I wanted it to be a surprise, I guess, because I don't know what's wrong with me. But I told, you know, she found out when I told the priest, what do I have to do to be baptized? And she started to cry, and then so did I.
Yeah.
And I was trying to thank him, find the words to thank him. And he said, yeah, I had nothing to do with it. That's the Holy Spirit.
Virgin Most Powerful Radio, sharing the gospel with clarity and charity.